Okay, so I think your positions on immigration really could be considered rebellious. Let's start right there. The U.S. has a debt to pay to Mexico. Explain that. What do you think the real issue is with those who say go home to the Mexicans? But why can't they simply come to America legally like many of the other immigrants before them? Hi everybody, this is Deborah. Recently, several Mexican journalists successfully applied for asylum here in the United States, claiming death threats due to their coverage of the deadly drug war in Mexico. Can asylum be used by others in Mexico to gain legal entrance into the United States? With me right now to discuss asylum and that issue is attorney Jason Dzubow. Dzubow is a partner in a Washington, D.C. law firm specializing in immigration law and political asylum. He's also the founder of The Asylumist, a blog devoted exclusively to political asylum. Jason, we've seen asylum cases from many countries, but is this new coming from Mexico?
I think supposedly there's an uptick in the number of cases coming from Mexico, and certainly there's been a lot more violence at the border, which has been widely reported in the news. Actually, if you look at the statistics on the number of cases coming to Mexico, although they're somewhat higher than they used to be, you'll see that actually the grant rate for asylum cases from Mexico is about maybe 2%. So it's very low.
Very low. Now, is it something that could possibly go on the rise, being that the very difficult political situation in Mexico, you've got the drug war. What's the possibility of more immigrants wanting to seek political asylum in the United States?
It's definitely a possibility, and in fact, I think that many people coming from Mexico who are fleeing violence from the drug lords or from other criminal gangs do have a potential claim for asylum. The problem, I think, is that the U.S. government is very hesitant to kind of open that floodgate. There's a fear, I think, on our end that if we start granting asylum to Mexicans fleeing the drug war, that we'll have an overwhelming number of people coming in. So I think that has kind of held judges and other adjudicators back from granting asylum more readily to people leaving Mexico, because certainly if you look at people who are coming and the situation they face, they do state claims for asylum.
Do you see that there could possibly be a public outcry if those from Mexico started seeking asylum, and why would it be any different from Mexico or from Ethiopia or one of the African countries?
Right. I think the primary difference has to do with numbers. You know, if you look at a situation like, say, Afghanistan, especially after the Soviet invasion, there was millions of people fled the country and ended up in refugee camps in Pakistan and in Iran. And I think there is a fear that if violence really escalated in Mexico, that we could have such a large influx of people that the asylum system that we have now, which provides due process of law and all the protections to people who are coming in relatively limited numbers, would be completely overwhelmed by a large influx from Mexico, just because of the proximity of the country. So it seems to me that if there was such a large number of people coming over, we would need to rethink how we evaluate those cases.
So our asylum laws now, are they fair, reasonable? How do you judge them?
I think for someone with a good lawyer, they're fair and reasonable. For someone who's pro se without a lawyer, or for someone who gets taken advantage of by a notario or an unscrupulous lawyer, they're not fair. And the problem is that once you have a bad decision in an initial asylum interview, it might be very difficult to reverse that decision. So I do think for people who can afford and who can find good attorneys, the asylum system is fair. And I do think that someone who has a well-founded fear of persecution based on one of the 5 protected grounds, if they have a competent lawyer, should be able to get asylum. But for many people, they just can't afford an attorney. And for those people, if you look statistically, like the grant rate for people who are pro se is much, much lower than for people who have an attorney. So
you said that there are five basic things that allow us to grant asylum. Is that what you're saying? Tell me about those 5.
Yeah, right. A person does not get asylum just because they're fearful of return to their country. I'll tell my clients, like, if someone in your home country wants to harm you because they think you're ugly, that's not a reason to get asylum. A reason to get asylum is because someone wants to harm you because they object to your religion or your race, your nationality, your political opinion, or a category called particular social group, which is a category that can include things like if someone wants to harm you because they don't like your family, or maybe you're an ex-police officer. There's different categories, and that category has been defined by courts in different ways.
So you have those criteria that you look at. They're fleeing for a certain reason, but what makes an asylum case successful? What then are they judged by in determining, yes, you can seek asylum here?
There's really sort of two broad issues here, I guess. One is the person seeking asylum credible? I mean, are they believable? And to be found believable by the fact finder, a person needs to submit evidence. They're required by the Real ID Act, which is a law that was passed in 2005. They're required by that act to submit evidence that is reasonably available to them. So, for example, if a person says, I was arrested and beaten by the police in my country, that person should get some type of evidence. It could be a warrant for the arrest. It could be a court document. Those things are difficult to obtain, so more likely it might be a letter from a family member. It might be a medical report. If there's some scars, it might be pictures of the scars and a report from a dermatologist. So they gather evidence to support their story, and then hopefully the fact finder, the judge or the asylum officer, will find them to be a credible witness. If they are credible, then they need to demonstrate that they do, given the facts of the case, have a well-founded fear of persecution if they're returned to their home country. And so that, in some cases, are easier than others, depending on the country the person's coming from and the reason they're seeking asylum. And so, an attorney knows the legal requirements and can tell the client and can help the client gather evidence. And so that's why an attorney is so important, really. Without the lawyer, people are kind of lost and they don't know what evidence might be helpful to their case.
So for the asylum seeker trying to come to the United States, where are they coming from? Where do we get the most applications from? What countries?
Yeah, actually, I think the number one country for asylum cases and asylum cases that are granted is China. And a lot of that has to do with Congress had passed a law essentially saying that people who have faced persecution because of the China one-child policy or forced abortion policy also can obtain asylum in the United States. We also get a large number of asylum seekers from Mexico, but almost all those cases are denied. And then there's just a wide variety of countries. I happen to do a lot of cases from Ethiopia, which is pretty common in the Washington, D.C. area and a few other places. Cameroon is a common country. And then the Central American countries, but again, those are very difficult cases to be successful at.
As an attorney, you could practice any kind of law, and it seems like practicing asylum, it seems like you probably have a lot of passion for what you do. Why this kind of law for you?
When I even before I went to law school, I was interested in human rights. And, in law school, we learn how to do cases in the United States, more so than international law. And so I thought this was a good way to represent people who had human rights problems and faced potential persecution in the United States. And, we're able to help those people to remain here and avoid problems in their home countries. And, for me, my family comes from Europe several generations ago. And so when we think about the family members from my family who did not leave and who remained there and then ended up being killed by the Nazis. And so that kind of colors what I do. I mean, I see the state persecution as, something that if we can work against it and work to help people who have that fear that their governments will harm them, that really is, I think, valuable work, and it's a good way to contribute to sort of the world community and to help human rights, but also to help our country, because a lot of the people coming here are very skilled, very educated people who contribute a lot to our country.
So tell us about some of your clients, at least one of them, because you have to get very personally involved with where they came from, their story. Tell us a story. that touched you?
Yeah, I mean, probably in some ways, my saddest case was a case of a woman who came from Rwanda. She was about 10 or 11 years old at the time of the genocide in 1994, and at that time, her family fled to a church for safety. The militia came to the church, and they separated the people into one group they were going to kill and one group they would not kill. It happened that she was in one group, and her mother and some of her siblings were in another group. And then she didn't witness it because she fainted before it happened, but her mother and her brother and sister were murdered. She survived. Ultimately, she ended up as a witness in something called the Gacaca Tribunal system, which is a system of justice that's trying to kind of examine the genocide in Rwanda. And because of that role, she was threatened by the people who were actually the ones who had committed the genocide originally. Her brother, a surviving brother, was murdered relatively recently, and then she came to the United States, filed for asylum. For whatever reason, she was denied asylum at the asylum office, even though this really was a really horrific case. We did her case in the immigration court, and it ended up that we were able to demonstrate to the judge that the persecution she suffered in the past was so severe that even if the conditions in Rwanda had changed and that it would now be safe for her to return, she would be eligible for asylum. And so we argued the case, and it was successful. It was a very emotional case for her to kind of recount some of the details of what happened to her family and her. But that was a real good victory from my point of view. I mean, I felt that was a person who had such a tragedy in the past, and now she has an opportunity to hopefully put her life back together and live a good life.
The big debate right now is on immigration reform. What area in what you practice needs reforming?
Asylum, I would say, of all the areas of immigration law, is probably the least controversial. I mean, if you go onto the internet and look at the anti-immigration blogs, or if you read some of the organizations that are opposing reform, asylum does come up periodically, but not nearly to the extent and not nearly with the amount of passion as say, like the DREAM Act or maybe a broader comprehensive immigration reform. But within asylum, there is a real need for representation for indigent people. It's done sort of on an ad hoc basis by finding pro se attorneys through different nonprofit organizations that operate in the immigration detention centers will look and help detained asylum seekers find pro bono attorneys. But that's not always possible, and especially for people who are detained in more remote areas like Florence, Arizona, or some of the detention centers in Texas. There's just not a large population of lawyers who are able to represent them pro bono. And there needs to be an independent evaluation of these cases to determine whether they should have an attorney to represent them, because there is a danger that we're sending people back who just can't afford an attorney to a country where they're going to be persecuted or killed.
Thank you so very much, Jason Dzubow, for joining us here on Deborah Interviews. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.
Thanks very much.